Hey everyone, it's Albertina here again with the sixth installment for Lasers for Beginners, and today I'm going to show you how to optimize your full engraving settings to get the best results and also to reduce your engraving time. So if you're familiar with Lightburn, you're probably getting more skilled in that. You'll notice that there's a couple of ways in the layers section which you can actually engrave something. Now for today's example, I'm using milestone discs, which I use and sell fairly often, so I've just got two of those examples here. You'll notice that it consists of a round circular disc, almost the size of a coaster, and then some engraving that I put on the surface of that. Now in this particular case, I'm not cutting the coaster out. I've already got discs that I use for that purpose. I'm just engraving on the surface of the coaster. So what I've done is I've created various circles in an array, the size of the disc that I'm going to be using, and then I've centered basically the images I want to engrave on them. And in that case, you'll see that I've got a layer here which represents the circles, which doesn't have an output to it. It's just I use it for centering. And the next layer, which I actually want to engrave, which is blue, which is set to output. And so that's just the basis of this example that I wanted to show you today. Now in the settings, you can either choose a line engrave, a full engrave, and offset full. So today I'm going to look at two options related to the full and the offset full, and then I'll also be looking at various options in terms of how you can fill the shapes. So the first thing I'm going to look at is these three options over here, and they consist of fill all shapes at once, fill groups together, and fill shapes individually. Alright, so these things have a really big effect on your cutting time. Now, if you didn't know that already, Lightburn actually allows you to give you a preview of your cutting or engraving time over here at the bottom if you click the preview button, and obviously it's only for everything that's set to output. So in this particular case, I've got my items there set to full. I've got my full setting, so it's obviously speed is very important, power less important for time, but obviously speed is critical. And what I'm going to engrave it shows up over here in the preview. So if I scale this back, you can see that it basically starts on the one end and engraves the one group, and then the second group basically starts to engrave. The way that it's actually set up over here, and I'll go through a couple of options. So if you double click on the layer, you'll notice that there's some settings at the bottom here. For the most part, you don't have to worry about that too much. One thing that you should note, however, is just make sure that your number of passes is 1. Most of the time you'd only engrave in one particular pass. Second thing is my scan angle, which is the angle at which the engraving happens, is 0 degrees. So that means only my x-axis is actually doing the engraving, and my y-axis only moves up in the iterations between my line intervals. If I set that to 45 degrees, for instance, you'll notice that when I do the preview, it actually engraves it at a 45 degree angle, which means my x and y axes are actually working. And you'll notice that the time is actually a lot more. So previously it was 15 minutes, now it's 24 minutes, so it's almost double the amount of time to do the same engraving. Now this would give you a nice or different effect. If you wanted a different effect, this could work particularly well for photographs or grayscale images, but for the most part I don't find any value in actually using my x and y axis to engrave something, just a normal full. So I, for the most part, keep that to 0 because it does affect the time. The second thing, and probably the most common thing that we know when you engrave, is fill all shapes at once. So basically, if you can think of the x-axis in this direction and the y-axis in this direction, we think that it starts and it fills all of these shapes simultaneously. So it will start on the lowest most one and then move its way up. So if we go to the preview, we can see that the total time has increased significantly from the previous version. So it's now 31 minutes, so over double the time. And if we run the preview, you can see that it starts on the right hand side because it's the lowest, and then basically when it gets to the same Y location where this engraving would start, your laser head would travel between these two consistently for every line interval. Now the reason that's important is because the bigger the gap between these two, the more what you would call white space or travel time that your laser head would have to move between them before it actually starts engraving something. And that's just wasted time. If you're doing something once off, it probably doesn't make a difference, but if you're rapidly doing things or doing things repeatedly and time is of the essence, which most of the time it actually is, then you would want to reduce that substantially. In saying that, it's very important how you actually describe these in Lightburn terms. So basically, if I click on that item, you can see that this is a group. The way that I know that is because I cannot group them any further. So this is a group and this is a separate group. If I wanted to ungroup them, I'll click this button over here, and you can see it makes it individual pieces. Then I can click on individual text. So all of the closed sections, it will make one group. And so I don't really want to do that because it means that I can move things independently of others, which is not something that I'd like to do. But for the most part, I do keep these items as a group, and that's how Lightburn then sees it. So that's the first option. You can also notice, what I want to show you really is if I move these items further apart or further away from one another, the engraving time actually goes up fairly considerably because of all the white space that, all the travel time that goes on between these items. So you can see it now went up to 41 minutes, so an extra 10 minutes, so a third faster, 30% faster, and that's really quite significant. Just for reference, let's move them closer together and see what happens. And you can see it's down to 27 minutes again, so still an extended period of time. What I also wanted to show you is if I do this, basically it reduces it back to 15 minutes again. And the reason for that is because I'm basically increasing in my y-axis when I engrave. It starts at the lowermost portion, and because they're not in line with one another, they engrave effectively these two groups separately. Now sometimes you don't always want to do that. For instance, if when I engrave this particular design, it's normally the whole workspace is filled with these things, and so I want to actually engrave every group individually, and that's where I come to the next one. So fill groups together. This is the one that I use most commonly because it makes the most sense most of the time. And what it means is that it will look at a group, it'll engrave whatever's in that group, and then it will move to the next group. So you can see over here it's 15 minutes regardless of the space between them. And the reason for that, if you look at the preview, is that it fills that group and then it fills this group. And so regardless of the distance between them, they get more or less the same amount of time. So you see. And so that for me, that's my default setting. If nothing else, and there's no other benefit or reason for doing anything else, that is the setting that I use because it gives me the most consistent results. Now the third one I wanted to go to was fill shapes individually. So basically, regardless of how you group these things, it would basically take every closed shape, see it as a group, and then fill it like that. And so what it would do typically in these types of examples, it will take the text, so each individual piece of text, you can see each letter, because it's a closed unit, it does as a group, for instance. So it fills every closed shape individually. This mostly gives you the quickest engraving time. You can see it's 13 minutes. It's only slightly faster than the other one, but because there's almost no white space between them, it doesn't move between these letters. It literally takes each letter as an individual piece. This, for the most part, will give you your quickest engraving. Now, most of the time that's okay. The problem comes in when you get really fine details or really fine letters. It means that your laser head is accelerating and having to stop rapidly during a lot of these passes. And I just want to show you an example of a much more complicated piece where this actually becomes an issue. So you can see this is a much more complex design. You can see that the letters are really, really small. And if I had to engrave this particular item to full shapes individually, it would probably give me the most consistent engraving. You can see this is a much bigger file. See, it'll take 2 hours and 42 minutes. But the way that it would do it is it will engrave every little letter individually. And from running this on my laser, I know that although it is quicker, it actually makes my laser's head move very rapidly. And if you're doing that consistently for hours and hours in a day, you could actually damage your laser. And for really small text, because it's accelerating, decelerating, changing direction constantly, you could actually put a lot more wear on your belt or get really out of focus letters. So in this case, even though it is longer, I would still fill groups together. And you'll see that the engraving time goes up fairly substantially to 4 hours and 33 minutes, but it's actually way better for my laser. So I hope that was helpful. That was the first part of this this tutorial, and I really hope that was helpful for you in terms of understanding what's best not only for your laser but actually gives you the most or the quickest engraving time when you're using a full engrave. So the second part of this tutorial is looking at the difference between full and offset full. So as I mentioned previously, there's effectively three ways you can engrave something. The first one is a line, where it literally traces a line on the outside. That's called, otherwise known as a vector engraving. And the other one is a full, or also known as a raster engraving. So the full is basically where it starts at the bottom typically, and then it works its way slowly to the top. So the full, as it says, it will actually fill the shape up, whereas the line will only draw the outline. Now this is a fairly simple shape, and it's just used to illustrate basically how this would effectively look. Now in Lightburn you get a full and an offset full. So basically what the fill is a normal raster, so it will just fill it up line by line. And the offset fill is basically filling the object but using a vector format. So instead of just going line by line and going up one iteration at a time, it will basically trace the image in vectors and fill it according to that. So what I wanted to show you today is really the difference between the two. So the first one I've got here is the top item, which is the red layer, and that's also set to full. You'll notice that the settings of these two is exactly the same. The red one for now is set to output so that I can see the preview. And this is just set to standard full. So if we go to the preview, you can say that you see that this will take about 10 minutes at these settings. And effectively what it does is just a standard full. So it starts at the bottom, works its way up line by line until it fills it up. So the red bits are effectively white space, that's where it's moving, but the laser's not firing until it gets to the other side. That's pretty simple to understand and quite common. So if we switch off that layer and switch on this layer, this is now the offset full. So you can say in terms of timing, that's 9 minutes 30. So for the shape, it's not actually that much quicker. If you had to engrave probably a sizable full, you probably find it is quite a lot quicker, but for this particular shape, it's not that much. So you can see there's a very big difference in terms of how it builds up and what the effect is at the end. Now if we scroll this back a little bit and we start playing it, you can see it actually starts in the center and then draws a series of fairly complex shapes, and that's how it builds up the full. And so not just doing it line by line, it actually draws vectors and then fills up the shape from the inside out. Now that gives it a really cool effect. It might not be an effect that you'd be wanting. It doesn't look like you can predict this effect in any sort of way, shape or form, but it really is. I mean, it looks amazing. I can't say that it's something that I would use consistently everywhere, but in cases where you'd want a nice or an interesting effect, then you can see how it works. It's actually really cool to watch as well, but again, it's probably fairly bespoke when you would actually use this. So that concludes today's tutorial. I really hope that this was helpful to you. This is basically the end result of what this particular engraving looked like, a previous iteration that I did it, and I've just engraved some of the settings to show you how the difference looks. This is on MDF, and yeah, if this was helpful to you guys, I'd appreciate it if you would like and subscribe to this video, and it will help me to make more videos. Also leave any comments of suggestions of videos that you want to watch in the comment section. I'll be sure to look at it. Thank you. Cheers.